We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This being Monday, May the 6th, 6 p.m. We will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We need a motion and a second for the approval of the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Any opposed likewise? Motion carries 4-0. I'd like to mention that Commissioner John Irwin is not here tonight. Understand he's at the, I believe at the Alleghany County Hospital right now. So our thoughts and prayers go out to keep John in our thoughts. We have a public comment section. Is anybody signed up for that? Anybody would like to speak?
Laura Painter. Yeah.
Please come forward and state your name. And you're just one person, so you're speaking for 3 minutes. And I'll keep, Daniel, you going to keep the time?
I'll be really quick.
And then I'll just let you know when you're getting close.
Okay, thanks.
Wait till she's ready. You got it.
Ready? Okay. I'm Laura Painter. I'm here to talk about the BDC proposed rent increases. I was here last year in front of you when you were talking about taking away the office space in the BDC. So thank you for allowing us to stay. I actually think that the proposal to increase the rates for people in bigger offices is a really good idea. I think that's very fair. I'm actually paying extra now for my office because it's larger than the other ones, and I think that's a great idea. I think it's wonderful that you're trying to make it budget neutral, and I don't oppose increases in general, but I looked at and calculated my office space, and it's going to be almost double what it was previously, and that's a lot to absorb all at once. So I would like for you to propose spreading this out over time so that we have time to absorb the increase instead of it happening all at once. And I would like for you to consider what the impact on the vacancy rate will be, because I imagine, and I've heard from a lot of people, that they won't be able to accept the increase. And so you'll be eating up a lot of your month's rent in vacancy. That's all that I have. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak during the public comment section? Hearing none and seeing no hands, I'll go ahead and close this section of the public comment section. Thank you. First up, under Section A, presentations to the board, Alleghany County Hazmat Emergency Operation Plan. Daniel and Doug Logan. Daniel?
If you recall, several months ago, I came before you and mentioned that we were looking to rewrite our emergency operations plan, and that the High Country Council of Government had secured some grant funding to help some of the counties rewrite some of those documents and bring them a little bit more up to date. All that time and money and work has finally come to fruition, and you guys, I think, have seen the final draft of that plan. So I want to take just a quick moment, and then I'm going to yield and get out of the way. Mr. Doug Logan is the project director there at On Target Preparedness. He worked as the emergency services director in Granville County for, I don't know, probably as long as I've been alive. So anyway, he's a wealth of knowledge. They have a great team. They've done a great job. So I'm going to get out of the way. Doug, it's all yours.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Madam or Mr. County Manager, Madam Assistant Manager, Madam Clerk, and Madam County Attorney. I always like to try to get all that right. I used to always make sure you addressed everyone. But it is definitely an honor to be with you tonight to discuss briefly the Emergency Operations Planning Project that we've been underway now, I guess, for pretty close to a year. A lot of work goes into that, a lot of review, a lot of things that really has to be done, and it's been a true partnership with Daniel and some of the other members here within the county to be able to help review that and add the input that is absolutely appropriate. Next slide, please. Before we get too deep into the presentation itself, do want to have a shout out to the High Country Council of Governments. It is because of them that we were able to do this project. They were able to secure the funding. We have worked with them with 4 other counties as well, and in the process of wrapping up that particular project, I believe the end of this month, right? We do have with us tonight Corey Osborne from the High Country Council of Governments representing them, so we're very appreciative of the opportunity to have performed this project for you and the other counties within the Council of Governments here. Once again, as Daniel alluded to a little bit about us, On Target Preparedness, we are an emergency management consulting company. We've been in business now for about 12 years. I've been with the company for about 4. I retired from Granville County in 2019 as the Emergency Services Director after 25 years in that position, and prior to that on the ambulance and volunteer fire and in and around emergency services for quite a long time. I actually got to spend about a 6-month stint as the interim county manager for Granville County when our manager decided to go on to higher waters couple of years ago. So I've been honored to work and serve our fellow citizens. With that, next slide. Throughout my entire career, this slide followed me just about everywhere I went. One of my favorite sayings is attributed to Louis Pasteur, and that is, chance favors the prepared mind. And in other words, I would rather be prepared than be lucky. I'd rather be ready than be lucky. And in fact, the closing signature of every one of my emails that I sent as the Emergency Services Director always said, if you're ready, you don't have to get ready. So part of that process of being prepared is going through that emergency operations plan and continuing to keep that updated with your emergency management process. So allow me to digress just a few minutes, and let's talk a little bit about what exactly is emergency management. Emergency management itself, we are basically that spare tire in the trunk of the car that you know is there, but you never really, citizens and anyone, do a lot to check on it until such a time that you need it and you expect it to be ready. Emergency management, put simply, is the effective management of emergencies and disasters through what we call or refer to as the 4 phases of emergency management: preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. And if you'll notice in that graphic there, it's represented in a circular form and not linear, because of the fact that at any one point in time, emergency managers are going to be working within one of those 4 phases. They all play off of each other. We prepare for it, we respond to it, we recover from it, we identify mitigation areas, and then we go back into, based upon what we learned, into preparedness once again. So emergency management itself came from the Civil Defense Act of 1950. That was something that was born out of a fairly small event. I think it was sometime in the early 1940s when the United States entered ourselves into the nuclear age, to where we actually unleashed nuclear power and we stopped World War II. But at the same time, with that power, the powers that be realized that, hey, if we did that to somebody else may do that to us. So, in order to prepare our citizens across the nation for that, the Civil Defense Act of 1950 was actually enacted by executive order from the President. And it was to create that system of local preparedness and education. It pushed money down to the local levels. It pushed resources to the local level. It sent education, all of these flyers and things like that. I often kid that when I first took my job in 1994, I believe it was, as emergency management, one of the reference manuals we had in there was called the Civil Preparedness Guide. It's a little different today, and we're going to talk about the CPG, how it is today. But back then, the Civil Preparedness Guide for Civil Defense, one of the things told you actually how to dig out an expedient shelter in your backyard so that you could be safe from a nuclear attack. We called it the baked potato syndrome. So that was kind of where we were there. Next slide, please. Well, fast forward into the 1970s, we came to the end, or towards the end, of the Cold War, that we were fighting back and forth with other enemies at a distance that we had there. And if you can believe it, somebody at the federal level actually had a good idea, and they said we face more hazards than just a nuclear threat. We now have created the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Next slide, please. So that was created in 1979 under the Jimmy Carter administration by an executive order as well. And it was to take that all hazards approach, to take a look at all the hazards that we face within our communities and across our nation, to include natural hazards, man-made hazards, technical hazards, human-caused hazards, things that we do face as a result of all that. Anything from natural hazards such as weather to terrorism events that would cause a large-scale response within our nation. Next slide. From the Federal Emergency Management Agency, we were given the National Response Framework, which was originally known as the National Response Plan. But they realized, again, another good idea at the federal level, they realized that all of our local jurisdictions don't operate the same. But we do have to have a response framework from which to be able to request resources from the federal government. So it was structured to be able to help our jurisdictions, non-government organizations, citizens, all of that to help develop community plans, integrate those continuity plans, in other words, the plans that we're going to use, how do we stay in business? Because we know there's certain functions of government that always have to stay in business. The same with a business continuity plan. Be able to help us build those capabilities for response and to stabilize and restore services back to its pre-disaster condition. Next slide. From within that, we get now the newer version of the Comprehensive Preparedness Guide, or CPG 101, that actually outlines how we are to develop and maintain our emergency operations plans. Next slide. So let's talk real quick about the difference between a plan and a standard operating guideline. A lot of times people will get a plan like what you have before you tonight to consider for adoption. They'll get a plan and they're like, well, this doesn't really tell me how to do anything. And that's not the purposes of a plan. A plan itself is a very high-level document. It exists usually at a city or county level or even at the state or federal level. The further or the higher level of government that you get, the actual higher level that particular plan becomes and less specific. It goes through and assigns responsibilities to particular positions within a county. And it establishes a general concept of operations, or that framework in which we're going to work whenever we have a disaster and how that happens. So a plan basically establishes the who of a particular operation. A standard operating guideline, we used to call them standard operating procedures. We kind of veered away from calling them procedures because that kind of sometimes gets you in a little bit of you're supposed to do it this way. So we call them guidelines, and that allows us a little bit more leeway to allow that. But it's become specific to a particular agency. Your sheriff's department would have SOGs to perform their basic functions. How are they going to do arrest, and how are they going to do paper serves, serving the criminal papers or anything else they have to do. So it becomes specific to an agency as to how that we're going to do that. It gives us operational parameters within which to work. So its standard operating guideline is pretty specific, and it establishes the how of an operation, not necessarily the who, but the how. Next slide, please. So we take a look at, and go on to the next slide. That eye chart there is kind of hard to read. your plan has been organized into 5 sections. We have a basic plan, the functional annexes, the hazard-specific annexes, your reference appendices, and the glossary of terms and acronyms that we've used throughout the plan. Next slide, please. So within the basic plan, that's the part that we outline or present a snapshot of the county. Now, quite frankly, all of you, I'm sure, are very aware of all the vital statistics of the county. Daniel, I'm sure, is extremely aware of all the vital statistics of the county. But when it comes down to someone else from the outside having to come in to work with you, this plan can be used as a definite reference or a guide when the local resources have become overwhelmed. Now you have that already identified. Things such as the current population, things that would need to be there, outline the purpose and scope of the plan. It gives that general description of the plan, that you're located in western North Carolina and what other counties are bordering here. So it lays that out, so we have that. It gives a general concept of operations as to how we're going to do this for every incident. We're going to use incident command system. We're going to operate within the 4 phases of emergency management. We're going to do this, and it doesn't matter the hazard. One of the things that I would always try to explain to audiences whenever they would listen to me was the only difference between a hurricane and the tragic events of 9/11 is that one was a crime and the other one was not. All of the consequences of that remain the same. So the general concept of operations will be outlined in your basic plan. We go through probably the most important piece in the entire plan is the assignment of responsibilities. Here's the long list of where every position in the county and what the responsibilities are. These are the things there. There should be a position in there for the chairman of the Board of Commissioners. There's a position assigned in there for the county manager. There's a position assigned in there for the emergency management director, so that it goes through, and you'll notice that he has the longest list in there, so you should be comforted by that. But it goes through and assigns those responsibilities, and these are the basic areas. What it does not do is it does not tell you how to do those particular things, but it does put as my daddy used to say, put the onus on the position to create their own standard operating guideline so that they know how to do it. The last thing in the world that we ever want to do, any of us, is to try to tell the sheriff how to do his job, right? I mean, we don't want to tell the sheriff how to do his job. We just say, Sheriff, during a disaster, we're looking to you to be responsible for these areas, and you figure out how you're going to do it. That's kind of how that works. Plan administration, how is it going to be? What is the scope? And Madam Attorney, you'll appreciate that it also has legal references and authorities. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the functional annexes. Within that, instead of talking about a hurricane or a tornado or a fire or any of those other things, we talk about, as I said earlier, the consequences and the general functional areas that are common to every incident that we face. We talk about direction, control, and coordination. So this gets down in the weeds a little bit more about how we're going to direct, control, and coordinate any type of event or incident that may occur. We talk about mass care and evacuation should we have to do that. Damage assessment. So we've outlined general and specific ways to go about those concepts of operation throughout that. Warnings and communications. How are we going to warn our public? How are we going to get the word out to everybody that we have and need to? Next slide, please. We do have some hazard-specific annexes because they carry with them very specific responsibilities that have to be in there, so they are addressed. Up until about 2020, I don't think anybody in here is old enough to remember the Spanish flu, but we did have to go through COVID altogether. Nobody really had plans for COVID. So our company, On Target, we have put together an infectious disease functional annex for emergency operations plans so that you can go through and use that as a guide for should you have some other type of infectious disease in the future based upon the guidance that we were all given during the COVID outbreak, the pandemic of 2020. But the hazard-specific ones go through. Hazardous materials has very specific legal things that we have to do to respond to a hazardous materials incident. Terrorism, very specific legal things that have to be done versus the general concept of operation as to who will come in, who's going to be in charge, how we're going to operate and function within those particular areas. So we have that series or section in the hazard-specific annexes. Next slide, please. And of course, we have reference appendices that gives you a place you can go to get quick reference based upon things that we need to do. From time to time, you're going to be required or need to declare a state of emergency for your county so that you can open up additional resources and make things a little bit better, or declare a place of curfews or any of that you may need to put prohibitions on within the county for the safety and the general overall safety of the citizens within there. So within that, one of the first things that I needed, the very first big event that I had in Granville County was Hurricane Fran in 1996, I believe it was. And they were telling me that we needed to declare a state of emergency, and I was like, okay, that's great. Where's the document? And unfortunately, I didn't have it. I could not lay my hands on it. We finally, the clerk researched, because it was considered ordinance once we did that, and it was referenced in our county ordinances, which back then were not electronic. So she had to search this mass of files and everything. Well, what I have done here, based upon what we've worked there, is to be able to put a template that can easily be used or pulled. It can still be modified. It doesn't have to be that same one every time, but easily put a template there that can be pulled, copied, or printed out and signed as needed by the chairman to work that. You also have reference about how the Emergency Operations Center will be set up or established and who can do that, and lines and change of authority to how that might get work. Next slide, please. And of course, the glossary of terms. We emergency managers are really bad about using acronyms. In fact, I used to have a long acronym that basically stood for, if it's not an acronym, it didn't really happen. And somebody gave me a bumper sticker one time about that. But you can see there we start off with an Amber Alert and a CPG and a DRC and an EOP and an EOC. And if it's referenced within the previous parts of the document, it should be and is defined within the glossary of terms. Next slide, please. So, all of that to say, how in the world do we use this? Well, first and foremost, we've already hit the nail on the head to say it is not an incident-specific playbook. There's nothing about the EOP that you're going to be able to pull out and say, this is how we do it, ... Not about it. Next slide, please. What it does do is it allows us that framework or that overall plan as to how we're going to address being ready. So we address the general concept of operations. We use this for example. The preparedness phase directs the development of those standard operating guidelines. It talks about the creation of mutual aid where you need it, even though I believe you are a signatory to the statewide mutual aid agreement. But to create mutual aid in inter-county as well as intra-county to be able to do. Directs pre-planning and identification of those response needs. So we talk about the phases of emergency management. Next slide, please. We go into the response phase, and it outlines pre-impact activities or suggestions for things that we can do as far as preparedness, working towards that. Things to do once it happens, things to do once it completes. And there are also sections on there about recovery and mitigation as we go from that. Next slide. The functional annexes, we've already covered a little bit about that, but just an example of how they look when it talks about direction, control, and coordination. That's one of the very first ones that come up is direction, control, and coordination. Because every incident that we have should be or should follow some type of really coordination, so we start from beginning to go to the end and bring it back around. Next slide. Let's walk through a real quick scenario. I'm going to have a disaster exercise at the commissioners meeting tonight. You can write it up as credit if you want to. Let's say that one of your largest hazards you have here is a major ice storm. I would assume that plagues you guys pretty much up here. We know when we have a freeze and rain event that some of the things that would likely to happen, we're going to have injury and mass casualties. We're going to have widespread power outages. That probably goes without saying. We know we're going to have transportation disruptions, and we're going to have public sheltering at some point because people are going to be without power for lengthy periods of time. Now, I know all the western people up here are very resilient, but I think you got a lot of folks that moved in that probably aren't, and they're probably going to be looking for the government to take care of them at some point. But we have public sheltering that is probably going to have to be considered. Infrastructure damages to government buildings is very possible to any of that, and loss of business and economic impact. So next slide, please. So how we use them? Let's look at injuries and mass casualties. You have a section in there under the functional annexes on health and medical, specifically outlining the details about, or the general nuances about your emergency medical service and how that is operated here, where the hospital is, where we're going to be getting medical care or medical airlift if we need that, to where it comes from. All that's outlined within that particular section. Next section, please. We talked a little briefly about public sheltering. Excuse me. There's a section in there on mass care and public sheltering, to where we're able to do that, and it identifies responsibilities and those concepts of operation within that for housing people that are in need due to that disaster. Next slide, please. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I promise to be very brief for you. I would be glad to try to answer any questions, but that's what we have tonight to present to you. Unless you have any questions, I think the next steps would be your consideration to adopt it. At the front of that document you have there should be an official document, obviously, would have a place with a resolution or promulgation to be able to sign and adopt.
Michelle, any questions? Greg?
What's the cost of this?
I have to default to Corey. We had 5 different counties that we worked with, and each one of them had more or less. I believe, Corey,
I think 20,000 or a little over.
20,000
Somewhere-
one time, 20,000 a year? or-
one time. Unless we come back to the table to redo some things within that on your behalf.
So every county has adopted something like this?
Yes, sir. Every county in North Carolina has this. Not this particular plan, but every county in North Carolina does have an emergency operations plan. The beauty of it, though, is this now becomes a living document to where it can be reviewed annually, it can be exercised and tested to make sure and updated as needed, because Daniel now has an electronic copy. I believe when we first started, you had a PDF version that couldn't really be edited and was just a real bear of a document to be able to do that.
Any other question? Timmy?
So we really don't have emergency plan now?
We have one, it's just a bit antiquated.
Okay, so I was curious, but yeah, I like what it's like a good layout of something. It goes back to that thing again about planning. If you don't have something in place, then you don't have any guidelines to walk through. So, yeah.
Michael, any comments? I think there's quite a bit to it. I will confess, I've only read about half of it. But, we never thought we'd have an earthquake. And when we did, Daniel was right there on top of everything. We had the state help, but we had no specific plan laid out like some of this. This gives us a leg up if something happens again. Someday something's going to happen. We don't know when, but it's sort of like an insurance policy.
Very similar.
It's something that you may not really think about all the time, but when you need it, you got it. And I think from what I've read so far, I just looked at some of the highlights, some of the things that I wouldn't even dream of, but there's a section, how to treat animals. Now, Alleghany County is an agricultural county, and now there is a plan of how to handle some of those situations. I don't know what practice that we do, the schools and the sheriff's department, if we had 2 buses that wrecked at the same time. I know how many ambulances we have, we don't have enough to treat 30 or 40, transport 30 or 40 people, but there's a plan laid out how to get around, how to work our way through something like that. And I think the plan is well worth the time, and it's, like I say, I think it's a good, sort of like an insurance policy. And if nothing else, this is for information. This is a presentation to the board, so we would put it on our next agenda or mid-month meeting. That gives all of us more time to read it, and then we'd have a vote at the mid-month meeting. I thank you for the great presentation. I could tell, I think you've done this more than one time.
A few times, yes, sir.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity again, and really appreciate the opportunity of work with Daniel. He's a true asset to your county. I can't say that enough, and I'm not just saying it because he was a client for a while, but he is, with his work with the Emergency Management Association at state level, upcoming president, I believe, right, next year? He's going to be, that's going to be a big benefit to Alleghany. I had the opportunity to serve as president of the association for a couple of years back in around 2000, so I was brought a lot of good contacts, got positive networking that I was able to bring to bear. So it's a wonderful thing.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Let's see, now we move, that's all under Section A. Now we'll move to Section B, Value Health, local support letter, and Daniel, you're on deck.
Zach Shepherd, he's come and presented to us before, stuff from Via Health. They sent this template, he sent this template to us to ask for our support for Via. They're trying to go after the statewide, to be the statewide provider for adoption, a specialty plan. He didn't send the RFP to us, just the letter of support. We just basically would fill in our name and send it back to him.
Cheryl, any comments? You're on that board, I believe.
I am on this board. I'm also on the Social Services Board, so it's basically a program that VI is trying to, it's called Pathways to Permanency. It's to help with the foster care and ESS agencies having more solutions for them and collaboration. So I think that it's a positive program. I'm supportive of it.
So you would support the letter.
Yes.
Greg, any comments or questions? Timmy? No. Michael or Heather? Hey, this there again, this is on for information. So Daniel, if you would see that it'd be on our mid-month meeting for a vote. No other comments on that. We'll move along to item number 2, and that's Danielle again.
Debbie Brewer sent this over to us. There's 2 vacancies on the local library board and 1 vacancy on the regional library board as of July 1st. Joyce Spees and Carolyn Sprinkle, their terms will come to an end at the end of June, and they are recommending Barbara Thompson and Stacy Barker to replace on the local, and Bill Osborne to replace on the regional for the library boards.
Is there any question about that? This is will be placed on the mid-month meeting for a vote. That gives us time to reflect on anything.
Did we have to
Bill
do
has been on the local library board before, so.
that another one that we go through the nomination committee? Did we have to do that with this, or
They have made a
they
recommendation.
made it and you just dig into that?
Take it or leave it,
Okay,
I guess is what.
it's easy enough.
So with everybody's approval, we'll put it on for the mid-month for action. Okay, now we have the BDC proposal. Courtney, come on up here, and I think what the board will give you a chance if you got any comments or anything, but I believe it's the board's desire to go ahead and table this to our mid-month meeting, possibly our June the 1st meeting, whatever, which one do we want to?
That or your work session. You're going to have a couple of meetings in between now and June 1st.
Okay, so we'll go through a work session, but if you've got any comments, please.
I just have a brief comment. I think that would be beneficial, and I thank Laura for coming tonight and kind of expressing, she's not here, she left, but expressing her concerns. I think that I completely understand, and I think it's important that we have an overview of the proposal and the revision of it, just because we want to make sure that we obviously take care of the county and bring in revenue from that building, but we also have to look at the other side of it as our tenants that we have there currently. Right now, that building is almost completely rented out. We have 4 vacant offices, so they are getting full, and we want to make sure that we provide those tenants, with fair rates, and that way we can continue to bring revenue into the county.
Thank you.
Yes.
Would it be the
Any
desire
questions?
of the board to go ahead and table this to a later date, and Michael will set that time up? Emmy, okay?
Yeah.
Michelle? Okay.
Perfect. Thank you guys
Thank
so
you,
much.
Courtney. So we'll go ahead and table this. Danielle, you'll work with Michael Carter on setting up a work day, and we'll go from there. Moving right along to item number 4, animal shelter update. Heather Klein.
Well, I'd love to say that we have some positive news. I don't know, I think the positive news is that the case is concluded, and that's about as positive as we can get. Unfortunately, the defendant in that case doesn't have any property or assets, and the DA, the conversation that I had sit down with the DA, he said the only asset that was ever put up by the defendant was a $1,000 cash bond that the clerk's office is holding, and I haven't been down to the clerk's office to determine whether we can apply for that bond or not, but unfortunately, he said the case did not go the way that they would have liked. The judge that heard the case was not from this area. It was a judge from Raleigh, and his opinion was that the defendant was being picked on because he had multiple cases that you could clearly see in his record. The DA was of the opinion that that should have given you a clue that this gentleman was in court multiple times for multiple offenses and infractions, and that you might have looked at it a little bit differently, which is maybe he would have spent some time in jail, and there might have been a higher fine, because ultimately what the court fined him was a percentage of the total bill at the time of the decision, which was $3,588. And the DA said that you probably have no, you should have no positive thought on the outcome of receiving that money, because he said he's not likely to pay it, and even if he doesn't pay it, there's not likely to be any repercussions for him for not paying that. Meaning he will not serve an active sentence for anything. He's on probation, and that is as far as that's going to go. So he was very upset about it. He did not like the outcome, and he said he could not understand why the judge didn't give a little more credence to the fact that the defendant kept delaying the trial on purpose because he understood how the criminal justice system works, and he was able to maneuver around that system. So there's not going to be any ability of us to regain any of the funds that we're going to have to pay to Twin Oaks for the care of those animals, which were considered evidence in that case. So the likely outcome will be maybe we'll get $1,000 for that cash bond once I apply to the clerk's office. So I'd love to have better information or an outcome, but he doesn't even have a driver's license, but he keeps getting picked up for driving without a license. That's how bad the DA said the situation is. I mean, it was a lot worse than that from the information he gave me, but I won't put that on public record.
Thank you. Michelle, you got a question or comment?
Well, I hope at least he is, number one, not going to be allowed to have any more animals, and number two, what is going to happen with the animals? Are they going to be released for adoption, or?
Yes, the DA said that we should be in the clear to put those animals up for adoption because based on the conviction that he's not allowed to receive those animals back. So they are available for adoption. He questioned whether or not this gentleman would have animals again, but he said, how are we supposed to know until there's another situation? Because in this one, these animals were not even housed on his property, because he doesn't own property. They were housed on his parents' property. They were in his vehicle, and even, he said, in North Carolina, you do not have to, in order to own a vehicle, you do not have to have a driver's license. You can have an ID. So with all of this, who's to say that it wouldn't happen again? It could be likely. Like I said, there's other information behind the scenes. It wouldn't surprise me if that we did see this gentleman again with this situation.
Rick,
We just need
questions?
to pay the bill and wash our hands of this mess. Ain't nothing gonna happen. I don't like it no better than anybody else, but we need to pay Nash and get rid of the dogs and be done.
Yeah, because there's no other possible outcome.
Amy?
So has word been passed along that they're allowed to adopt the dogs out now from?
No, because I just had that conversation with the DA, but that is something that we can pass on. So maybe a conversation I have with David so that he knows, and then we can move forward.
Michael, any comment? Okay, my question is, sometimes hard to understand the legal system. And I think this is one of those times that the system let down the general public, let down the taxpayers, and having a judge from Raleigh, I didn't know we went that far away to find a judge, but apparently we do. I just want to be sure that the Twin Oaks veterinarian gets paid what's coming to them, and how is that worked into the budget?
It's not in the budget, so
We'll have to have a budget amendment at some time.
we'll just have to look to see if there's any available funds within the current budget. And if so, we'll do some line item transfers that'll come back before you. If not, we'll have to amend the budget to allow for it.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Heather, for that bad news. Moving right along to section, to item number 5, reevaluation committee establishment. Michael Carter.
Well, all we can do is go uphill from what Heather just said, so it's that time again. Rita Miller, if you remember, had talked about putting an RFQ out for reappraisal services. And she done that, and in return, received 4 proposals back from qualified firms. And the stage that we're at now is here are the proposals. And what we've done in the past is whichever committee of the board that, the RFQ kind of fit with, we would ask for that committee to be a part of the interview committee that went through the process of interviewing and then recommending a firm to the full board. And I know the budget committee has been involved in this during the budget process. So tonight, I'm just asking for, I guess, Timmy and Bobby, since you're on the budget committee, if you two could sit in on these interviews and be a part of this process to where we could recommend a firm back to the full board. And the dates, just so you know, that we're looking at, your next meeting of the commissioners is on the 20th. That's your day meeting. So ideally, if we could have that first committee meeting after the board meeting, you'll already be here. We can have that meeting, we can line up whomever. If you recall, during the RFQ process, you go through a ranking, basically, and you go through a score sheet. So you'll have some homework, you'll do your scoring, we'll get back together, compare, see who the overall top firm is, and then go from there.
So let's take these one step at a time. I would be willing to serve on that committee. Timmy, would you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Would that be okay with you, Greg? And would that be okay with you, Michelle? So you have your committee members.
And I will give both of you a great packet before you leave.
Okay. Now, do you want to set a date for the first meeting?
Yes, sir.
And you wanted that the day after our 20th?
Day of your
Same day.
May
Same
the
day?
20th, yeah.
It's a 10 o'clock meeting.
After the meeting.
If that doesn't work, we can have another day.
Just meet right after the meeting. Shouldn't take more than an hour and a half.
We've got 4 proposals. Shouldn't take very long to compare the score sheets. There's about 15 categories you're going to rank these firms with, so.
Yeah, I can make it right after that. Timmy,
Yeah.
right after that.
Yeah.
So it'll be on the 20th. Anything else, Mr. Carter?
Let me make sure. That's it for that one. That's all.
Okay, any questions or comments about that? Thank you. Under general business for action, we have 3 items. First one is the Daymark lease. Danielle, page 39 through 41.
This is, we didn't do any changes to this lease for them this time. We're just basically changing dates. That's all we'd be doing. It would start at the beginning of our fiscal year, so July the 1st. This contract technically has run out, but we can go month to month, and we won't run out of time in that limit for the month to month we're trying to get all of our stuff back on the fiscal year timeline, because we've had some stuff get kind of off, so.
And Heather, that's fine with you? Mr. Carter, any comments? So we need, is there any discussion on this lease agreement? So we need a motion and a second to accept.
I'll make a motion to accept.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, likewise. Motion carries 4-0. Thank you. Item number 2, school lottery funding budget amendment. April, Fisherman April.
Yeah, good evening.
Evening.
We have one budget amendment this evening. The Board of Education actually applied for some funding to help with a roof repair at Piney Creek Elementary. It's in the amount of $350,000. It has been awarded. It's just going to be a pass-through right now to the school system. So we just need to amend the budget to receive those funds so we can get that paid out to the school system.
Any comments or questions? If not, we need a motion and a second to adopt.
Motion to approve the general fund number 15.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed, likewise. Motion carries 4-0. Thank you. Item number 3, scheduled public hearing for budget fiscal year 24-25. Mr. Carter.
I think each one of you has a binder in front of you. That binder contains the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. I'll defer to April in just a moment for her to give you a quick overview of the binder. But what I would ask the board to do is, historically, you have set a public hearing in the evening of a particular date to allow for the general public to attend that public hearing. It seems that more people have that opportunity later in the day than earlier. So in looking at the calendar, I'd like to recommend May the 23rd, and I've got it at 5 o'clock. If that's too early, or we can move it back an hour, but May the 23rd would be the date that I would recommend to have your public hearing.
I'd say let's have it at 6 o'clock.
Jimmy, is that date good for you?
Yes, I think so.
Bill?
Fine.
And what about changing the time till 6?
I'm good with that.
Bill?
Fine.
The 23rd, and we'll change the time to 6 o'clock.
And some point, as we go through, I'm trying to get my calendar pulled up, but if we have that public hearing on the 23rd, then I would also just suggest, and we can certainly set that at a later time if need be, but having a work session on the budget after the public hearing. That way you have the opportunity to hear the comments. We can talk about, whatever we need to talk about at that work session before considering a vote on the budget, which I hope would be June the 3rd. And all that falls right in line. So with that in mind, you're looking sometime the week of the 27th. And we can certainly change it if need be, but I would recommend the 28th, which is the day after Memorial Day, at 4 o'clock for your work session on that budget proposal.
How does that work for everybody's calendar?
What was the date?
28th.
28th.
I have a fire commission meeting that night, 7 p.m. Did we do it before at 4 o'clock?
That's what I'm saying,
Okay, yeah,
recommending at
that's
4
fine.
o'clock.
So 4 would work?
Yeah.
Jimmy? Great. 4 o'clock.
We'll have a work session on the 28th at 4 then, okay? And now I'll defer to April. She can kind of give you a quick run-through of the binder.
Okay. Everyone should have a binder in front of you. And if you'll just open up to the front of it, I'll kind of walk you through it so you can see how we have this laid out. In the very front, you're going to have a highlight of what's incorporated in the budget. And these are just highlights. If we're talking about raises, if we're talking about personnel, if we're talking about recommending equipment, vehicles, you're going to find it in there, in those highlights. The next section is your anticipated revenues for next year. And that is all that section is. So we have the proposed revenues in the green. We have the this year's adopted revenues, and if there's been any amendments to those revenues, that is represented in the blue. And then we actually added a column to show you the difference between the 2 years, what's being proposed and what is current. So you have that difference in the yellow. So if you'll go to the next section, and it is laid out per fund. So your first fund is the general fund, and then your second fund is going to be the fire tax, and then it goes from there. So if you go to the second section, we have proposed expenditures. And this is exactly how our budget is laid out internally. I have highlighted each department, so you'll see the first one's governing bodies, the second one's administration, and it's kind of the same columns as before. What the budget committee is proposing in the green, the adopted budget with any type of amendments that have been done for the current year, and then the difference between the two is going to be your third column in the yellow. And there's actually 29 pages of the proposed expenditures. It does start with the general fund, and then it runs the same as the revenues. Your next fund will be the fire tax fund, and then it matches with your revenues. The last section, and you'll have kind of an orange divider, is your supporting documentation for the budget. The first one is actually the proposed pay grades and the positions that we have in each of those pay grades. We are not proposing to raise any of these hiring rates this year. We want them to stay the same, but you will see a couple of adjustments in there and a couple of different positions than we've had before. The fourth page of that, you're going to see part-time salaries. We have proposed basically the half of what we have proposed for the full-time amount. We have proposed half of that to give a raise to our part-time folks. And I have a calculation there for that. And then everything else in the book is actually the fees that have been presented to the board. We have a copy of those for you for reference. So can I answer any questions about your budget books, the proposed budget?
I would just like to remind the board that we had a fee schedule presented earlier that we need to be sure when we adopt this budget, if there's anybody that wants to look at a different fee schedule, our work session would be the time to do that.
Are you talking about the BDC?
No, I'm talking about, actually, I'm talking about the solid waste.
Oh, okay. So I was just going to say the BDC revenues that are in your budget are at the current rate, so it wouldn't reflect that.
I'm concerned about this $98. I think that it should be raised, especially in light of having to buy this new loader and pay interest that we're going to have to pay to borrow some money to pay for it, possibly. So, I mean, there's several things that I think now's the time to look at before we adopt the budget, and the fee schedule in the past has always been something of a concern to a lot of people. Other than that, April, I'd like the presentation, the way that it's done, and color coding makes it easy to read. And
Easy to find, yep.
I know that the Finance Committee put in close to over 100 hours or close to it.
We did. And just to inform the rest of the board, we started February 9th is when the budgets were due in finance. We started meeting on February 27th. We met 18 days. over 120 meetings, over 100 hours in those meetings. But together with additional time between the county manager, myself, and finance staff, we have 200 additional hours on top of that. So that's where that is the prep that went into this document for the board.
And I especially like the no property tax
Yeah.
rate increase
Proposing no
again
property-
this year.
Proposing no tax increase.
Yeah. Mr. Carter, any comments?
Save them for your public hearing.
Bill, comments, questions? Greg, Kimmy?
I just wanted to add to what April, I really appreciate her doing that, because I don't think people really realize in the county how much time that you put into, and I know maybe not everybody agrees with all the decisions that we come to, but there's a lot of thought put in this, and it's, and a lot of time, and it's done. This is the second time I've done it. I learn something new every time, but I've learned how more appreciation of what time goes into trying to form a adopted budget, and just want to add what April said, and it's, I don't regret it. I think it's time well spent, and I hope everybody appreciates it.
Thank you. Mr. Carter? Comments? Moving right along to manager comments.
You have the building inspection monthly report on the screen. You also have that in your packet. Urge each one of you to look at that. It gives you a snapshot of a year ago versus today. I do have a couple comments I'd like to add. The first one is the bid opening for the courthouse project is now scheduled for May 14th at 3 p.m. inside the Board of Commissioners meeting room. Originally, that bid opening was supposed to have been the 30th, but there was some information that was left out of the bid packet. So to allow the contractors to have the appropriate time to review and comment without just throwing a number at it, we extended that by 2 weeks. So that'll be the 14th here at 3 o'clock. It's already been mentioned that we're looking at purchasing a loader for the transfer facility. I have 3 quotes actually in front of me that we've gotten in. I've spoke somewhat with the budget committee about that, but probably get back together with you guys just to make sure that we're all good on the same quote. We can do that the same day that we meet after the 20th, or prior, whatever your preference is. But we do have 3. These pieces of equipment, they're not sitting around on a lot somewhere. You've got to give them ample time to get them in and get them ready. We have sent the Doosan manufacturer the letter that we do not wish to purchase that piece of equipment at the expiration of the term, which is in September. So we will have to act on this probably at your next meeting to ensure that we do have a piece of equipment ready and waiting for that time to come. The next one is, we've talked a little bit about the transfer facility. If you recall, the first time that the RFQs were put out for engineering services for that facility, we did not receive any. So we put it back out, changed it a little bit, made a few calls, got 2 responses that are laying right here from two well-known engineering firms. Again, during the RFQ process, I always like to afford the board a committee that's associated with it. I know the Building and Grounds Committee has looked at that building a few times. It seems like I'm picking on 2 of you, and I'm not. You just happen to be on the same committee, but you all can do whichever. I'd like for the Building and Grounds Committee to help review these and interview the prospective engineers, or if you do not wish to do it, if you like to nominate 2 other people, we can have 2 independent people altogether, but there are 2 engineering firms that are interested. I'd like to get this going as quickly as we could. We still have, I think, somewhere around $100,000 of that SCIF award money that will help go towards this project. So I'll let you all decide, but building and grounds, you guys, you've been involved in it. And that's, again, that's Bobby and Timmy. So.
Let us talk and we'll get back to you. What about this Wednesday? Would that work? I know we have a 4 o'clock meeting. Would 2:30 or 3 give us time to?
Yeah, I'll have things ready. I'll have to make a score sheet. I can get it. If you want to do it Wednesday, I can get it done.
We'll do then Wednesday at what time?
I would say 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock? We're going to be here for a 4 o'clock meeting anyways.
Is it here or?
No, up there.
Okay. I'll give you all your homework with that too. So the next item, just for information, I think it's public. You all recall the school system and their award that they have received to build a new high school. And I won't get into the dollar amounts, but I do want to tell you for informational purposes. We had talked earlier about trying to do an interlocal agreement between the county and the school board to facilitate this new school. I received an email indicating that the school had ran it by their attorney, and the attorney recommended running it by the auditor, and the auditor basically indicated that that wasn't something that the school should be involved with. So I've asked April to send it to our auditor as well to get their thoughts on it, and I've asked a couple other people, sent them an email to get their thinking as well. But if it turns out that entire amount of money has to run through the county and the reporting has to run through the county and everything associated with it, that's going to be quite a task, and it's going to be quite a task for 3 years. So, you know, if we're talking about a $60 million project thereabouts, and I don't know the bid because they hadn't put it out as far as I know, but that's what it's estimated to be at. That's quite a task. That is the equivalent, if you divide it in 3, it's $20 million. That's the equivalent of your general fund in 1 year. So, you know, you've got a proposed budget in that book just shy of $30 million. This would be quite the task for the finance department and those involved in, you know, preparing, submitting, ensuring. There's a lot of things that goes with that. And the last thing, as I've said before, we continue to have some employees that are out dealing with illnesses or medical conditions themselves or with their family, and we'd like just to continue to let them know we're thinking about them, keeping them in our thoughts and prayers. That's all I have.
Thank you. Cheryl, you want to go first?
Sure. This weekend, we had the Apple Pie Festival, something that we've worked really hard on. The Fairgrounds Committee and Willie Bottomley and crew and The fire departments came out and helped park. It was, other than the weather, it was a very, very successful weekend. It was estimated that over 5,000 people were there at that festival. There was plenty of apple pies this year, and the parking was great.
I had two.
Two, okay. I'm not going to say how many I had, but we had great vendors. Everybody was having a good time. If we just could have got the rain to hold off a little longer, I think we would have had a lot more people. But saw Heather there. It was a really good event, and look forward to having it next year. So a big thank you goes out to the Fairgrounds Committee, the fire departments, all those other ones I mentioned, Jimmy Church, Randy Murphy. There was a lot of people involved, so thank you for that. That is true economic development. People came here and spent money on gas and artisans' work, apple pies, stayed in the hotel, stayed in Airbnbs, ate at restaurants, so it was good for Alleghany. The next thing I wanted to bring up is I have been contacted by some people who are in the county concerned and trying to help the efforts at the animal shelter, help get animals adopted out. We all know that the Twin Oaks staff works very hard, but they're very overwhelmed. If you ever go to Twin Oaks to take your pet over there, you're always waiting in line because they are so busy. And now we have a group of people who, it's called Friends of the Alleghany County Animal Shelter on Facebook, who are posting animals and all for the critters of Alleghany. Ann Williams sent me this email, so they're always looking for volunteers to help them. And I'm a big animal lover myself, and I would love to see people adopt dogs and cats, and please get your pets spayed and neutered so we can stop the cycle. So, but if you're interested, contact Ann or contact Twin Oaks, and they can get you in touch with Ann or some of the other volunteers that work there. But I told her I would mention that in my commissioner comments to bring awareness to that. And lastly, I want to wish John Irwin a speedy recovery. I don't know what's going on, but John is a nice guy, and I certainly hope that his health will improve, and he'll be out of the emergency room soon.
Thank you. Brad?
I also hope John's doing good. And I think Daniel said a while ago he's the president of Emergency Management for the state, or
Upcoming.
Yeah.
I'd like to see if we get a county seal put on his truck. It says Alleghany County home of the Blue Ridge Parkway or something, but you know, we get a county seal on that truck. That's all I got.
Jimmy?
After looking at that pile over there, I need to just shut up and so we can go home and do our homework. But I do want to say I wish John the best. I hope he's doing okay and he can get well and get back. That's it.
Thank you. Just real quick, we got homework to do. Apple pie, fried apple pie, considering the weather, was a big success. I had more than my share of apple pies, but the rain was much needed for the people of the county. But I just wished it would have switched from Saturday to Sunday, but Mother Nature knows what she's doing, so I think everybody had a really good time, especially if the weather had just been a little bit more cooperative. Voting is still going on. People, please come out and vote. We have all the people working for the election, and it's an honor to be able to vote. So please come out and vote. Speedy recovery for John. I'm sure he'll do well. We're all thinking about him. We've had I think a very, very legitimate complaint about a piece of property on DeWitt Road. I don't know who's looked at it. I've been out there. I know Michael's been out there, and I think John's been out there. But I feel for the people that live next door to that mess. I would hope that the health department would be able to do something, but I'm just not sure that they can legally. I know it was about 6 years ago, the county looked at a ordinance about property, and that was one of the biggest shows that we've ever had that filled the commissioner's room during that period. And the majority of people who spoke were very much against any type of land ordinance. I would suggest those people go right out on DeWitt Road and look at what that poor person is facing. I tell you, I've been to a lot of third world countries, and it's probably a fourth world country, the way that place looks. So with that being said, I'm finished. Heather, Michael, Danielle, Fisherman,
No, thank you.
I will go ahead and call this meeting adjourned. Thank you. Tammy, we got to get our homework.